Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's a futuristic look into perfection when I put Michael Anderson's Logan's Run against Andrew Niccol's Gattaca. And, this one was an interesting one to get through, so let's just dive right on into the first one. We have Michael Anderson's Logan's Run starring Michael York as the titular character of Logan, and he's what they call a Sandman, which is basically his job is to terminate the runners who try to go to their death or whatever the fuck. It's something to do with this thing called carousel. And they live in this domed city, and in like the 2345 or some shit like that, way far into the future, even for us like now and shit. But there's this domed city, and the populace doesn't live past 30. Once you get to the age of 30, then you do this thing called carousel, and it's supposed to like renew you or some shit, but really it's just killing you. And it's a way of not dealing with death and all this shit. So it's already some weird shit, but the colors and the set design are something to be really impressed by, even if like you can clearly see what's models and shit, but it's still like really great. And you got Michael York as Logan, and you got his friend played by Richard Benjamin. They're both Sandmen, and you see in the beginning, they both have no qualms about taking down the runners because they fully believe in the bullshit that they've been led into and stuff. So then you get Logan gets an assignment from the supercomputer to try to locate what they call Sanctuary, and they assume this is the place where all the runners that get away end up going to. So the way they do it is they take away his little life crystal, and now he's got to find all the pathways to Sanctuary and stuff, and he gets help from this kind of essentially a prostitute that he couldn't bang, played by Jenny Agutter, and she helps him get through. But then they're also trying to kill him. His friends trying to kill him because now he's a runner, and it's just a chain of events, and the movie turns into this chase film. And the supercomputer gives him this mission, and isn't really pretty clear that he's not coming back from it, but he still does it. He goes every step of the way, ends up finding a robot that's like freezing people to use for food and shit, and and then when they finally break through that ice chamber and stuff, then they find an old man played by Peter Ustinov, who is living in what's clearly Washington D.C., and he's living in the Senate and stuff, or the White House, probably one of those fucking places in D.C., but it's all like covered in vines. He's the only one there, just him and a bunch of cats, and and then this kind of opens up like when they hear his story, they're like, well, they got it all wrong and stuff, and then they all fucking decide, well, let's go back. We got to prove to him, and old man goes with them and stuff. And essentially they just tear down the system, because once Logan goes back to the supercomputer, then he just completely overloads it, and the thing implodes on itself, and all that dome city is destroyed, and then all the inhabitants break free of it, and they see the old man, and then like it just ends with that shit kind of. So it's like there's a whole new day, it's a whole new way of living and shit like that. The ending, I'll admit, is kind of corny and shit. Like I said, spoilers too. Y'all should know by now to watch the movies before you watch the videos, or if you just don't care, just you shouldn't even worry about spoilers. But the ending itself is a little corny, but the fact that they tear down the system is pretty great. The movie itself is a very exciting chase movie. The shit that Logan and Louise, or I forget what the fuck her name is, but whoever Jenny Agutter plays, they go through some shit, and of course Jenny Agutter is very hot as well. And then we move on to Andrew Niccol's Gattaca, starring Ethan Hawke, Uma Thurman, Jude Law, and Alan Arkin. Also, Tony Shalhoub has a really great part in it. The film itself is centered around society is really obsessed with genetic perfection, and anybody that doesn't have that genetic perfection is called an invalid, basically. And so Ethan Hawke plays one of the invalids. His parents took a gamble, as he calls it, to, just and not buy the genetic perfection and stuff. And then they do that with their next kid because they feel bad for the one they got. So this like enables this dude to like really like strive for perfect because he wants to be an astronaut. He wants to go to space and everything, and then they know it never happened because the doctors predicted he's not gonna live past 30. So kind of like Logan's running don't live past 30 or some shit. Only the difference is like they didn't have like genetic diseases. This dude had like a bad heart condition and all this shit. But after swimming competition with his genetically perfect brother, he then leaves and goes on his own and builds and finds a way to become, or at least fake, being genetically perfect. He finds through the Tony Shalhoub character, who plays some kind of black market, skeezy type dude, that he gets in touch with this character Jude Law, who was a very like a big swimmer and stuff, and then had an accident, and now he's in a wheelchair, so he's not able to use his full potential. So they're able to make it, fake it, and everything with Jude Law's piss and hair follicles and all the other genetic material they need, the blood and stuff. And so Ethan Hawke basically gets into what is called Gattaca and is on his way to be, an astronaut like he wants to and shit. Instead of the janitor getting shit from Ernest Borgnine in the film. And, the film itself is kind of a slow moving one, and of course you had Ethan Hawke's narration doesn't really help add any energy to it. You see Logan's Run and it doesn't have any of that shit. It just kind of moves on its own. It's very fast paced and stuff for as many slow parts that are in that. But the Gattaca itself is very low energy, and of course Uma Thurman's the love interest. She's stunning in the film, but the movie itself is very anticlimactic because it centers around there's a murder, and one of the flight commanders that's suspicious of Ethan Hawke ends up dead, and of course he's the prime suspect and all this shit, and Alan Arkin's the detective, which is something that should be way more interesting than it is, but it's not. And then he runs into his brother again, and then that sets off the more competition shit, and then just if the dude had like gotten caught, and had not been able to go to space and all this shit, and then maybe they kill him, or I don't know if there had been a way more profound ending than just Jude Law killing himself and then fucking Ethan Hawke's character going up into space. Everybody kind of, he gets to fulfill his dream and then, leaves this dude with enough genetic materials that you can fake it for a little longer if you want to or need to type thing. And so, like I said, it's very lame compared to Logan's Run. So this round clearly has to go to the 70s. Logan's Run gives another point to the 70s for anybody keeping score. That's 35-30. The 70s are up by 5. Look, for a while, it looked like the 90s were coming back, but the 70s kind of taking it back to, up by 5 now. Jesus, that's a pretty good, pretty hefty margin there, But the 70s sci-fi was, really some of the pinnacle of science fiction films. A lot of the big classics and stuff. I don't really know if like Logan's Run is a titan of that era, but it's definitely a real gem of a film. A very interesting concept, more so than Gattaca, because Gattaca kind of has, in a way, like Logan's Run doesn't try to overstate its plot or like create like this huge message. There's a lot of like subtext there, but it's not like beating you over the head with it like Gattaca does, which is one thing that the 70s were good at. They could make an entertaining film and still have that subtext that you go back and watch. It's like, I never thought of that, because, the first few times that you watch a film, specifically like Logan's Run, you're having so much fun with it, and it looks good and the colors are vibrant and all that shit. And the action's pretty decent too, even if those blasters are a little fucking weird, but and you can kind of tell some of the special effects are not really like the best. But something like Gattaca that's so drab, boring, kind of trying to be like a film noir, German expressionist film, something that Dark City did way fucking better. But, and that would have been a more interesting one. But there's plenty of sci-fi to go around for that one. So, 70s get this round. They're currently up by 5. This shit is getting pretty wild, And like I said, if anything I've said that you disagree with or, something I've said that's wrong, please let me know in the comments. Eviscerate me. I don't care. If you got any suggestions, like Give me a 70s equivalent of Dark City. See what like I said, I've got at least 5 pages of these matchups. You'll see some bonus rounds pop up. This was a main event round. The next main event round will be The Exorcist versus Stigmata. And like I said, more and more will pop up because I got to know. This is like a rough draft to a doctoral thesis, but now it's become like a scientific obsession. So have fun with that.